Dean of the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business at Marshall University. Welcome to our now new Global Connections webinar series. It's the second event in a series of webinars given by the Lewis College of Business faculty and global business leaders from around the world. The series showcases these experts and the challenges and opportunities they have experienced as their careers have been enriched by forging relationships with multicultural and multinational organizations. It encourages student interaction with these professionals to enhance their understanding and appreciation of global business environment in which they might someday work. The mission of the Lewis College of Business and its Brad D. Smith Schools of Business is to promote economic development in the regional community and beyond. We do this by implementing a set of strategic priorities, one of which is our priority for global connections and engagement. Business is increasingly a global endeavor. More than ever, as organizations around the world adopt a cross-cultural global mindset, it's important to recognize and nurture our global connections and understanding. The college engages in international connections, articulation programs, and formalized partnerships to introduce students to the social and cultural aspects of business activities in other countries and around the world. We firmly believe that global connections enhance the college's ability to bring opportunities to the region. A global footprint and connections can improve enrollment, expand experiential learning, and increase alumni support and other sources. The college has already established and is nurturing partnerships with several foreign universities. We host visiting scholars from universities around the world and have sent faculty to teach full-time courses at the Guizhou University of Finance and Economics, GUFI for short, in China. Another initiative is study abroad opportunities. The college had its first two study abroad programs, one in Ireland and one to Australia. While a recent study abroad program was canceled due to the coronavirus, we hope to have many more of these trips coming because these are life-changing experiences for our students and strongly relate to the priority of building leadership skill sets and global engagement. The college's Student International Club is also an integral part of the college's global footprint. We have developed this webinar series that will consist of at least one presentation with a prominent global business leader each semester to help students further their education and learn about global business. We hope that you enjoy today's presentation and learn more about global connections while sitting right here in Huntington, West Virginia, or wherever you are around the world. I'll now introduce our featured speaker. Thomas Havighorst is an international human resource management expert who has been an HR executive in international companies. He has also been a management consultant with McKinsey & Company, advising international companies on their HR challenges. This is the second time Thomas is sharing his knowledge and experience with students at Marshall. In 2018, he gave a presentation to our students and visited our campus. The topic of his speech was consulting skills. Thomas will have conversation with two of our own faculty members. Dr. Boniface Yemba is an assistant professor of international business who joined Marshall University in August 2018. Boniface was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo and studied and worked there. Currently, Boniface is the college's faculty advisor for the Student International Club and the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Dr. Kevin Knotts is an assistant professor of management who joined Marshall University in August 2018. He has a PhD from West Virginia University. Kevin is an expert in human resource management, negotiations, and related topics in management. After the discussion, Dr. Ben Eng, our Associate Professor of Marketing and Entrepreneurship, and the Executive Director of our iCenter, the Center for Entrepreneurship and Business Innovation, will coordinate audience questions and wrap up today's event. I now turn over the program to Dr. Yemba and Dr. Knotts.
Sorry, thank you, Dean Avi, for that beautiful introduction to the panel. I'll pass to Kevin Knox, who gonna present. I'm gonna present today, as well as Thomas. Okay, Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be sharing this with you. I was I was very excited to hear that this topic is of particular interest to students at Marshall University. So I've put a little agenda together here. Very simple, we're going to talk about, we'll divide the whole time up in three things. I will talk about a bit of my international background, my international career and my journey that I've taken, with the objective of maybe inspiring one or two of you to think about an international aspect that you might want to go after in your career. But also just to trigger some questions maybe at the end of the presentation. I've selected a couple of hot topics in international HR management to talk about, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for question and answers, and I'm looking forward to the interaction with you guys. So let me share a little bit about my background and how it became as international as it was. I'm born and raised in Germany. I've got German nationality. Right now I live in Wiesbaden, close to Frankfurt in Germany. I went to high school here. I went to college. I got my bachelor's degree in business administration from a German university. And really my international career only started after that. There were a few things in between that already hinted to me probably moving around the world. There was a strong interest in foreign languages. There was a strong interest in traveling, seeing, being abroad. So much that when I was drafted into the German army at the age of 21 for 1 year, it was so dull and boring, I decided to join a United Nations operation to Somalia. Now, some people called me a bit crazy for doing that, but I was always interested in things and what is going on abroad. So that was one of the things I did at quite an early age. I also had a lot of touch points with the United States. I came over to live in host families during the summer when I was 16 and 17. I came back after I graduated from high school. I was a camp counselor at a YMCA camp in South Carolina. I did 2 internships in West Virginia actually during my studies, one in Gallipolis Ferry with a company called Akzo Nobel, another one in downtown Huntington with Merrill Lynch. I was a soccer coach at St. Joe High School, which some of you might know. I coached the girls team there. During my studies, I came back and I wrote my graduate thesis with a company in North Carolina. So quite a lot of touch points with the US. I went to graduate school in the Netherlands, actually. So I got my master's in international economics from the University of Maastricht, which, you know, back then was an unusual thing to do, even though it's easy in Europe to go from one country to the other and study there and work there. To get your degree in another country, typically at that time, was an unusual thing. I got my first job offer in the UK. I did an internship with Guinness there, which you might know, the beer company. Very interestingly, worked for the marketing director of Guinness Africa, which led to the fact that I actually had a training workshop in Kenya. So Africa, back to Africa again. After Somalia, also visited Kenya. My very first job then actually after graduation was with PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was a consultant in their training department. And after a while, I joined Shell. And I spent actually most of my working career in Shell, about 9 years. I moved with them. First, I joined them in the UK. I worked in graduate recruitment in the London head office. I then asked for a transfer to the Netherlands. I was working at the refinery, negotiating with unions and learning all the good stuff you have to learn in HR. And I also moved into a job in mergers and acquisitions in Shell. I had, for example, at the same time, which was an interesting period in my life, I had an acquisition project in the Ukraine where Shell bought a number of gas stations and built a joint venture. And at the same time, I also had a project in France where Shell divested 3 refineries. So I spent my working week between the Ukraine and France for about 1.5 years. After that, I joined Oracle. I became the HR director of what is called the Benelux region. So it's the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, or 2.5 countries, as one of my friends calls it. And I did that for 7 years. For 3 years. I was at Oracle as an HR director. And after that, got a very unusual offer to join McKinsey & Company. Unusual because the traditional route is that you finish graduate school, you do an MBA or any other master's degree, and you join them fresh out of high school, and then you go into industry afterwards. Now, I joined industry first, and then I transferred to McKinsey. Interesting time there. I stayed for 7 years. I had lots of really, really cool, interesting projects all around the world. I've dealt with, consulting engagements I had one in Mexico. I had one in Asia. Most of them were in Europe. The most unusual one that I've put up here as well was in Tanzania. I did a workshop on organization design with the railroad company of Tanzania, and flew in there for a couple of days to do that. That was probably the most unusual consulting assignment I've had in my entire life. 2 years ago, I left McKinsey. I set up on my own. I'm a freelance consultant. I have my own little consulting firm consisting of me, myself, and I. And I still do the same work I've always done. It's always got to do with organizations, with human resources, with people, with talent, with organizational culture. And the most exotic consulting assignment I have at the moment is I'm helping a very, very large consumer goods company, one of the 2 largest in the world, with an agile HR transformation. And the whole project takes place in South America. Most people are located in Argentina. And we've launched this project after the lockdown of COVID-19 hit us. And so the whole project has been remote. We're doing everything through email and video conferencing, which I have never done before, but it works. So actually quite an interesting experience as well. I want to talk a little bit about cultural differences. And since I know a number of faculty are attending and Dean Avi is also here, I know I need to bring in something a little bit scientific. So this page is trying to make a mix of something scientific and my own personal experiences. Now, when you move around so much internationally, you are going to come across cultural differences between various countries. And I thought I'll share some experiences with you on cultural differences between Germany, where I was born and raised, and then 2 of the countries I lived in for quite a while. One is the Netherlands, where I lived for about 10 years. And the other one is the United Kingdom. I lived in London for 2.5 years. And some of the things that struck me there. Now, when you talk about cultural differences, there is actually a really good methodology to talk about these differences. It was developed by Professor Hofstede at my alma mater, Maastricht University, where I got my master's degree. And I put the source down here. So good website if you actually want to look it up. Very, very interesting stuff. You can type your own country in and then compare how it differs with other countries. Hofstede has developed a number of dimensions. I think in total it's now 6 or 7 dimensions on how he explains cultural differences between countries. I've only picked 3 here. He has a masculinity index, a power distance index, and an individualism index. And what these indexes really deal with, the masculinity index looks at what is the general attitude in society towards success. The power distance is obviously the attitude towards power. And then individualism is about the I versus the we. How important is the group versus the individual person? And the attitude towards success, I had a funny incident when I moved to the Netherlands for my graduate degree. Now, when I studied in Germany, all the German students know that getting good grades is really, really important. So everyone is studying really hard. Everyone wants to get an A. Everyone wants to get the best grade. One of the reasons is it's important if you want to land a good job. If you want to work with one of the big German companies, you want a job with Mercedes-Benz or BMW, or you need to have good grades because it's highly competitive. Now, in the Netherlands, not so much. For them, going to university is about developing yourself, about broadening your horizon, about getting involved in lots of other stuff. For example, student organizations, not just going to the lecture, not just studying and getting the good grades. So I will never forget that the Dutch students said to the German students in Maastricht, guys, why should a good horse jump higher than it has to? So they were happy with getting the minimum grade to just pass the exam, whereas as all the German students were fighting for the best grades. So I thought that was highly interesting. I never really understood at the time why you wouldn't want to get the best grade in everything you do. Now, the power distance is also quite different between Germany and the Netherlands. Germany can be very hierarchical. You're not easily on a first name basis with someone in Germany. That takes a while. And when I say a while, it can take years, even though you're working with these people every day. But it's unusual to address your boss on a first name basis until he offers it. And as I said, that can take a couple of years. Whereas in the Netherlands, that's absolutely not the case. And I will not forget, I was working at the refinery in Rotterdam for Shell. And I was involved in a project, and we had to deal with some resistance from employees to some changes we want to make. And one of the employees, I interviewed him, and I said, why are you being so difficult? Management wants to go this way. Why do you need to have so much discussion about it? And the guy says, you haven't understood. The Netherlands is different from Germany. Your boss's decision is just the starting point for a good discussion. It's not really a decision. And so I thought that was quite funny. I never looked at the world this way. I thought if your boss makes a decision, you follow it, right? But that was my German upbringing, I guess. So on the last index, the individualism, the attitude towards what is more important, me as an individual or the collective, the we. I thought was really interesting is when I got my job offer from Shell in the UK. I actually had 2 competing job offers, and I could not make up my mind which of the 3 companies to join. So I was so struggling with the decision that I forgot to communicate to any of the 3 companies why I was struggling with the decision. And after a while, I got a call from the hiring manager at Shell, and I explained to him I had 3 offers, and the other offers were really interesting as well. Actually, they paid more as well. And he spent the next 20 minutes on the phone explaining to me why this job that he offered me was the best job and what it was doing for me and my career. So he was not trying to argue, listen, we really like to have you on the team. Here's what we want to achieve as a company, as a team. No, he was arguing, Thomas, this is the best thing for you, for your career, for your development. I'm fully behind you. This is what we will offer you in terms of development. So it was all about my development. I thought that was interesting. I don't think a German company would have done that, but you see here in the ranking on individualism, the UK ranks quite a bit higher than Germany. So have a look at the Hofstede Insights website. If you're, for example, interested, how does the US compare to any of these countries? And what can you expect if you work in these countries? I thought it was really interesting thing to look at. I also want to share with you my top 5 lessons learned from living abroad. And some of them might look obvious, but they are really lessons learned. It's only with the reflection and the benefit of hindsight that I can be so clear about these 5 lessons and why they are my top 5 lessons. Number 1 is learn the local language. It might seem obvious, but if you, for example, move abroad as an expatriate, let's say in a couple of years, you work for a big American company, it sends you abroad to France or any other country that has a different language, you might think you get along with English because English is an international business language. And certainly I've seen it when I worked for Shell in the Netherlands. Colleagues of mine who work at the headquarters, some of them have lived in the Netherlands for 10 years, they hardly speak any Dutch, right? Because at work you speak English all the time. But if you don't learn the local language, it excludes you from a number of social activities with local people. And if you want to really experience another country and its culture and how people think and explore the differences, you need to speak with the local people. I mean, don't just meet with only other expatriates. That's actually my lesson number 2. There is a risk of socializing too much with other expatriates, because what this group shares is that most of them don't understand why the country they live in is different. And that accelerates a phenomenon called culture shock. After a while, you think it's completely acceptable that everyone moans about why this country is different. Why can't I have this? I'm used to this in my country. you know, that's just a poor way of integrating and really doesn't help you explore the country and the culture. So you need to hang out with the locals, you need to learn their language. You also need to adapt to what they prefer to do, right? So you might love American football, but you move over to Europe, you'll find very few people care about American football, right? When I lived in the Netherlands, the sport that was actually most popular by people I was surrounded with was field hockey. So at the age of 20 something, I think 27, 28, I started learning field hockey, which felt a bit odd. I played tennis, I played soccer, but you know, that was a perfect way of meeting people, starting to join a field hockey team. Another thing that's important is when you observe that people are different and you don't quite know what to make of it, don't jump quickly to conclusions, right? Observe it, accept it, tolerate the ambiguity that you cannot explain right now why they're different. I'll give you an example of what I frequently hear from people who travel from Europe to the US. One thing where they jump quickly to conclusions is you meet an American person and they quickly say, hey, how are you? Now, hey, how are you in the US is just a way of saying hello. Whereas, for example, in Germany, if you want to say hello, you say hello. You don't ask, how are you? If you ask somebody in Germany, how are you? They think you really want to know how they're doing. And they're going to talk for the next 10 minutes about how they're doing. And they're going to moan about all the things that are not going well. So a couple of my friends misunderstood that when they traveled to the US, and then they were surprised that their American friends weren't really interested in how they were doing. They didn't understand it was just a way of saying hello, right? So they weren't too impressed afterwards. And I told them, don't jump to the conclusions. It's just different, right? You can't interpret this. And the last thing, and maybe that's also an encouraging thing, is traveling, going abroad, exploring these differences will change you. It will give you things that otherwise you wouldn't have learned. I often get to hear from people especially from German people, that they tell me, you're not really typical German, right? There's a couple of things you do really differently. And it's stuff that I've picked up in the US, it's stuff I picked up in the UK or in the Netherlands. So I don't think of myself as being that typical German anymore. And I think I like it. I wouldn't have done it any other way. So that's a little bit about me and my background, and I'm happy to take some questions from you later on. Now let's move into the topic of international HR management. And I've chosen two topics that I think are really hot. One is the topic of remote working. Obviously, with the lockdown and COVID-19, that, I mean, it was a trend anyways, but that has really accelerated it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that means, what the implications are. And then I want to talk about another topic, which is diversity and inclusion. So I've tried to find some numbers here, but in how far remote work has really increased. It's not COVID-19 that has started it. So much is for sure. I remember early discussions in early 2000, 2001, 2002, when many companies gave their employees laptops and mobile phones, which, you know, started the question, why couldn't I work from home every now and then? Because I'm now mobile with the things that I do. But it has really accelerated it. So the amount of people who work from home 5 or more days a week has jumped from 70% to 44% in the US ever since COVID hit us. So that's an infall by 2.6%. And obviously that puts a challenge to many managers, which is the question, how do you manage employees' productivity when they are remote? Right? You don't see them anymore. It's hard to control the input of what they're doing. So how do you manage that? And interestingly enough, I found this. Some companies decided that it would be a good idea to invest in what is called employee monitoring software. I call it spy software. I've put a couple of providers here that offer this kind of service, and it has a range of different features. Some of them just want to make sure that, for example, an employee doesn't print off very confidential documents at home. So the moment an employee would do that, an alert goes to the manager, which I think, you know, that's maybe a relevant feature, but some of them are doing things like taking screenshots of you. You don't recognize this, you don't know this, but they take screenshots, they send them to your manager, And so your manager can look at the screenshots and could find out that, hey, you've been doing your private email, for example, or you've been buying stuff on the internet, or you watched Netflix while you were supposed to work. So some managers think that that's a good idea to basically spy on you and control what you need to do. The infold in sales after COVID-19 hit us was threefold. I found this on Bloomberg. I thought that was really interesting. Now, I'm not sure that for some industries, for some businesses, that might be something relevant they need to do. I'm not so sure this is such a good idea, because typically employees who get spied on don't feel really trusted with what they do. And I'm not sure they're going to bring their best to work if they don't feel trusted. So to me, what it really comes down to is this. It's a quote that you might have seen from Steve Jobs, but he says, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. We hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And if you have hired good people, why would you not trust them with delivering good work? So that's a real, I think that's a real issue that's going on in companies right now, how to manage that remotely. Should you go more into controlling what people are doing? Should you go more in a different kind of management style that's more trusting? Should you move more towards controlling the output, maybe the results that people deliver, rather than how much time they spend doing it? That's a really hot topic debated in the HR community at the moment. Now, I want to share a story with you that I found remarkable. I heard this 2 weeks ago from one of my clients. This is a hotel in Berlin. It's the Hotel Alexa. If you look on the picture on the left-hand side, it doesn't look like a luxury hotel, does it? I mean, if I went to Berlin on a weekend trip, maybe that's not really the 4 or 5-star hotel I'd like to stay at to treat myself. And also, if you look at the picture of the room, it looks a little bit more like a youth hostel or a dorm or something like that. But this hotel, during the whole pandemic and lockdown, has an occupancy rate of 90%, while most other hotels in Berlin have closed. How did that happen? So the only kind of travel that is allowed in the lockdown is business travel. You can't go to Berlin just because you want to spend a weekend there. So tourist travel is actually not allowed at the moment, but business travel is. This hotel is owned by a good friend of mine. He owns another business, which is a software company, and he spends about 80% of his time in the software company and only 20% of the time at the hotel. He has empowered the local team at the hotel to take a lot of decisions themselves. And so he's trusting them to do the right thing out of a necessity, because he doesn't have the time to spend as much time at the hotel as in his software company. So when COVID-19 hit them, the team, not the boss, came up with the following idea. Why don't we go around to all the construction sites in Berlin, look at the cars and the vans that stand in front of these construction sites, and in Germany, on the license plate, you can see what city somebody is from. So they took pictures of all the vans of the contractors who came from outside Berlin, who had a license plate from outside Berlin. And then they went back to the hotel. They researched on the internet, these companies and the phone numbers. They had the names because they typically printed on the vans, on the lorries. And they called these companies and said, by the way, our hotel is open and it will stay open. If you need a place for the people who are working on this construction site because they're coming from the outside, we stay open and we have very competitive rates. They also called all of the hotels that had the instruction to close, right? And they said, listen, if you get inquiries for rooms, but because you're closed, you can't help your customers, you can refer them to us. So at least you can help them find a room because we're going to be open. Now that strategy was phenomenally successful. As I said, occupancy rate of 90%. And all of these ideas came from the team. I spoke to my friend the other day and I said, surely this was something you inspired. And he said, no, the team came up with this. I said, who in the team came? It was certainly one person, wasn't it? He said, I have no idea and I don't care. The team came up with it. They have saved their jobs through this. we're making actually good money that we need to invest and upgrade in things. And the morale in the hotel is fantastic. Everyone's really happy despite the difficult circumstances of COVID-19. So I thought that's a remarkable story of somebody who's trusting their employees and who's empowering them to do stuff and take decisions. Now, here's my hypothesis, right? And I'm honest, this is my personal hypothesis. I think there are some changes required in the leadership and the culture that companies have very often. And I've tried to put it down here in a from to kind of way. And I think today we still have many managers who derive their standing from status symbols, right? The big corner office or the size of the office that you get if you become an executive, to, you know, you get a higher salary, you can afford the better suit, you can afford the more expensive watch, you have a larger company car, you probably have a parking space right in front of the building. So lots of status symbols that that basically communicate that you're a powerful person. Now, when you work from home, all of that is gone. You're working from your living room or your private office, and you might have children running through. I've had that the other day with a very senior executive that I interviewed, and all of a sudden his little children ran through his office and wanted to talk to daddy. So, you know, they become human beings all of a sudden. So how do you then manage your employees? And I think it needs to go to inspiring them, right? How do you get them truly excited about the work you're asking them to do? Why does it make sense to do what you're asking them to do? So a personal hypothesis. I think it needs to go from the control of the effort, i.e. how many hours am I working per day, to a focus on the results. It really shouldn't matter how many hours you work and from where you work, whether you sit at the beach or you sit in your home office, as long as you get the job done, as long as you deliver the results that are expected. And if you deliver them really easily, maybe as a manager, you can be a bit more demanding and challenge them a bit more to improve their results even. I also see many business leaders and managers trying to be the Uber expert, right? They got the promotion to management because they were good at what they were doing. They were content experts. The best salesperson got the job as a sales manager, right? Now, that also means that they typically think they know everything better than their employees, and they're asking their employees to basically ask them for a lot of permissions. Now, I think that needs to move to a culture of accountability. You know, not so much asking for permission because I'm the Uber expert, I know things better than you, but rather I put you in charge. Here's the problem to be solved, come back to me with a solution, and you're accountable for the solution and that it works, right? I don't have all the answers. The other thing that I still frequently observe is that feedback seems to be very limited and only given when something goes wrong, right? Now, we all know if somebody tells you all the time the things that you are doing wrong, that's not good for your self-confidence. And so I think feedback needs to move to a more balanced feedback that increases people's self-confidence. And I experienced what that is when I joined McKinsey. The way feedback is given at McKinsey is very, very different from any company I've ever worked for. It is called strength-based feedback. It talks a lot about what you're good at and what you can develop further. But it really increases your self-confidence because McKinsey was operating this on the principle that if you have really good people, the difference in their performance will be how much self-confidence they have to apply their skills. So I think that might be something some companies want to copy and move into that direction. Certainly when I'm talking to my clients about this, there is appetite and excitement for moving into that direction. Good. So much about remote working. Let me move into a very difficult topic, and that is the topic of diversity and inclusion. I know it's a politically charged topic. I'm not going to go into the politics. I'm going to go into the facts, and I'm going to go into science and data. The question really is where we're going with this topic. It's been around for a while now, and it can go in many different directions. One possible direction is that we'll see governments increasing regulation. And when I say that with an international view and not just a US view. I'm not that up to date on what the planned regulation is for the US, but in many countries, affirmative action is actually illegal. You're not allowed to do it. If you did, you can get sued by the employee. But I see a lot of discussions also in Europe about should we, for example, have target quotas for women in top management, for women in supervisory boards, going in different directions. Some countries have introduced it, some are discussing it, some are clearly saying we don't want to move into that direction. It could also be that we see a greater voluntary effort by corporates, that companies actually, for some reason, see a real business case here and voluntarily move into that direction. It could also be they're moving into that direction because they feel political pressure to do this. Or will we see a decreasing importance of the topic? I mean, you know, it's the impact of COVID-19 might be that we are getting into a bit of a recession, certainly not into a lot of growth. And maybe in a recession, we all of a sudden see that other topics are more important than diversity and inclusion. So it could be that that is happening. I have no idea. The question is, where are we going with this? Now, before I share a little bit more with you, I want to say one thing. When it comes to HR, it is one of the few areas in companies that often operates based on belief and opinions and not necessarily on data and facts. And it's something I've always, whenever I worked in HR, whenever I work with clients, I bring facts and data to them. And as a result of this, something is happening that I was reminded again of lately as I saw this quote from Professor Soll, who says, some things are believed because they are demonstrably true, i.e. there is data, there is facts, there's analysis. But many other things are believed simply because they've been asserted repeatedly and repetition has been accepted as a substitute for evidence. And that's certainly the case when it comes to many topics in HR. There is a lack of data. If you compare it with somebody working in finance, I mean, if you work in finance, there's very little room for beliefs and opinions. The data either says your company is profitable or it's not, right? It says your costs are too high and your turnover is good or not. But in HR, we don't work that much with data. So I'm approaching this from a data point of view, this whole diversity topic. And I'll start with something very practical. This is an actual case study that I worked on when I was a consultant at McKinsey & Company. It was an international company. They approached us, they told us the following. The female participation in the overall workforce is 50%. So if we look at all of our employees, half of them are actually female. However, when we look at top management only, it goes down to 10%. We don't recruit very much from the outside. Our principle is we largely promote from within. So we want our own people to move up into top management. And we think we have a very competitive company culture. Actually, we're very sales driven. Most of our activity is sales. We have a bit of production, but it's very sales driven. And in sales, you can measure very well who's doing well, and it's competitive. So, you know, in our company, we think we have a high performance culture and only the best people move up into management. And our assignment was the question, how can we increase female participation in top management? Now, Boniface, I don't know, can students, can they unmute and tell me what they think we should be doing? Is that possible?
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay, so I'm posing the question to everyone who's in this case study. Can you just shout out some answers? What do you think is a possible solution for increasing the female participation in top management in this company? Oh, I see students at Marshall are very shy. Come on, guys, I won't bite your head off. There's no right or wrong. Share your hypothesis.
I'm not a student, but I would automatically look at what development programs could we put in place to help foster growth opportunities.
Okay, development programs. Good, that's one good question, one good answer. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm a student. Maybe look at other countries and other companies and see, and look at one that has a higher female population and see what they're doing, or interview possible, maybe get a survey go out to see what females would actually be interested in, what would drive them to want to come to the company. See what I get their firsthand experience of what they would actually want compared to what you hypothesize on what they would want.
Todd, you're a future potential McKinsey consultant because your first answer was you go and look at other companies. A McKinsey consultant calls that you go benchmarking. Very good answer. What else could you do? Anyone else?
Yeah, hi, I'm Navpreet Singh. I'm a Marshall student. And I suggest that we should give them a flexible schedules, because women, they do more than us, like, right? They have to they have to balance their work and their house life. So we can offer them a flexible schedules.
Okay, so your hypothesis for the problem is they have challenges managing the private and the work, and therefore we should give
Exactly.
them a bit more flexibility. Okay, so you would introduce some policies around providing greater flexibility about working from home or working part-time and these kind of things. Okay, good. Right, I'll give one more person a chance to share something.
I think I would want to understand the past practices of the company. Why haven't we put more women in management? So I'd look into that a little bit. And then I would ask our female employees what they think the impediments are for them advancing into management.
Okay, Fred, so you're starting to collect some data, right?
Yes, sir.
With surveying people or focus groups or workshops or whatever, but get the data out there about what the problem could be, from at least from a women's point of view.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Now I'll come back to the solution, which will amaze you, which will very much surprise you. But before I do that, I want to come back to the data and the facts that I mentioned before. So here is something that my former employer, McKinsey & Company, puts out there. It was published in a 2020 report. They've published similar things in the years before. Report is called Diversity Wins, How Inclusion Matters. And they're saying, our reports show that the business case remains robust and that there is a relationship between diversity on executive teams and the likelihood of financial outperformance. And it has strengthened over time. We've looked at data from more than 1,000 large companies in 15 countries. And here's what we found. If gender diversity is great, companies in the top quartile of gender diversity have a 55% likelihood to have financial outperformance, whereas the likelihood is only 44% if it's in the bottom quartile. When it comes to ethnic diversity, the difference is even bigger, right? If you're in the top quartile of ethnic diversity in your executive management, then the chances of financial outperformance is 59% versus 43% if you're in the bottom quartile, if you don't have that much ethnic diversity. Now, McKinsey is a very reputable company. So if they put this out there, and if they put data behind it, a lot of people will say, well, they must be right. There is a business case. And it's one of the most common arguments you find, that there is a business case. It makes good business sense to do this. You will be more successful. Now, I also like to look at scientific evidence, and that paints a different picture. So this is, I found this at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton Business School, one of probably the top, 3, 4 in the country that you have, probably worldwide, one of the top 3 and 4. And they've looked into this, and they've looked at all the studies that have been done, and there have been a lot of studies done on this. And they basically say the following: yes, many people and many commentators suggest, well, they call it commentators, they could have named McKinsey here, but they suggest that there is a relationship between gender diversity and financial performance, and that it improves financial performance, right? And they say the following as well: rigorous, peer-reviewed academic research paints a different picture. The results of numerous academic studies on the topic suggest that the presence of more female board members does not much improve or worsen a firm's performance. So the data doesn't seem to be all that conclusive. McKinsey has data that says it does improve the performance, and the academics say we haven't found any evidence for this, right? Now, I've looked into this, and there are some, I mean, we're talking about reviewing 140 studies, academic studies on this, and doing a meta-analysis and finding, yes, there is some evidence, but it's very, very weak. And so maybe there is a correlation, but even if there's a correlation, it doesn't mean causation, right? It doesn't mean one thing causes the other. So, you know, with that in the back of my mind, we worked with this client, the case study that I had before, and our hypothesis was that high performance causes diversity, not vice versa, right? So our working hypothesis was, if you decide on who to promote to top management, companies who have a high performance culture promote those with the strongest performance records. And a side effect of that is that other factors do not really impact the promotion decisions, right? Now, if nothing really else impacts the promotion decisions, if only the best people get promoted with the best results, then anyone can rise to top management as long as they perform, right? It doesn't matter how tall you are, what country you're from, and so on and so forth, what gender you have, what religion you have, shouldn't matter in a high-performing culture. And as a result, with, you know, having a blind eye on these kind of things and only focus on the results, you should have more diverse management. That should be an outcome, not causing it. So that's a hypothesis with which we went in. So I'm going to tell you now what the solution to the case was. So we analyzed the promotions that the company has done in the last 5 years. And we were looking at what was driving the likelihood that somebody got promoted. And yes, past performance was one of the 4 drivers, but it was in the ranking, it was at number 4. There were 3 other reasons that were more important why people got promoted. Number 1, by far the most dominant factor, was the role that you held before you got promoted. People in sales got more frequently promoted than people in any other function, right? The company valued sales experience in top management, and so they promoted proportionally more salespeople. And here's the thing, when we looked at the sales population, the female participation was not 50%, it was 25%. So apparently sales roles, for whatever reason, weren't that attractive to women, so they didn't apply for these, or the company didn't look hard enough to find them, whatever the reason. But you know, that obviously explains a lot. The number 2 thing that was rewarded with a promotion was loyalty, measured in service years. How long have you been here? Number 3 was the number of direct reports you had. So obviously someone who's already had, you know, maybe managed 5 people, maybe now is the time to promote them to a position where they manage 10 or 20 people. So the number of direct reports was important. And the conclusion was, quite frankly, the client didn't have nearly as strong a high performance culture as the company's top management assumed. That's what we had to tell them, right? Past performance was not the primary driver of promotion. I'm pretty much at the end of what I wanted to present. I'll hope we'll still have plenty of time for Q&A. And I think Boniface, at this stage, I'll hand it back to you and Kevin on the questions.
Great presentation, Thomas. This is the second time I've had the opportunity to speak with you. Both times have been wonderful to hear about your experiences. As you mentioned earlier in the presentation, really the focus here is the students trying to sort of look at that international gear. For those students who are in the audience, you know, here at Marshall, if they're interested in international, we sort of push them and advise them to work with Boniface's international business parts. If they're HR, we sort of push them to get involved with SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. What other advice would you have for those students who want to pursue a career in international HR, both right now and then sort of over the first 5 to 10 years of their career?
Right. Good question. You know, one of the things I would look into if I was a student now is the opportunity to study abroad. You know, spend a semester somewhere else. Get started with that. That's typically an easy thing to do. Most companies, most universities now have the same international standards. So you get the credits for back home. Doesn't make your studies any longer, doesn't cost you all that much more money, therefore. So look into whether you can spend a semester abroad. If you can't spend a semester abroad, look into maybe an internship abroad. Can you do a work placement during the summer, going somewhere else to another country? The way to do that, I mean, obviously you can apply yourself. I don't know, let's say you want to go to Germany, you can apply to a German company. You just do some research on the internet. That's easy these days to find a company that interests you. Let's say you love cars, want to work for BMW, you send an email and you apply. I mean, they have internship programs and these kind of things. Obviously now with COVID-19, the situation is a bit different, and I'm talking more about when we get back to a bit more normal situation. The other thing you can do is you apply to an American company. Let's say you apply to American Express in New York, right? And you say, hey, I would love to go abroad. Do you have an international trainee scheme when I maybe do an internship and work abroad? If all of that doesn't work out and it's too difficult with getting work permits and visas, maybe you just want to go and travel, spend 2 months traveling through Europe, experiencing what the differences are, experiencing what it can be like that some countries have really different ways of doing things, and just experiencing that. At the beginning of your career, for me, it was always clear I wanted to live abroad. So I immediately, after graduating from university in the Netherlands with my master's degree, I went to London. I worked in London immediately. I didn't go back to Germany and ask a German company whether I could work from them and maybe they can send me out. But that's also a good way to do it, right? So if you can choose an employer with international operations and you can clearly say at the beginning, you know, I'd be flexible and open to relocating at some stage in my career, that's a good idea to do. I think there is more possible than people imagine in terms of trying to find experiences abroad.
Okay. And then to build off something you talked about earlier, you talked about how the remote work situation has increased in the US, obviously, as a result of the pandemic. In Europe, we already had a little bit of a different work schedule, work week pre this, but are you also seeing similar sort of remote work hybrid trends there, or how has that sort of shifted, got my tongue twisted there, during this, and do you see that continuing as well?
Yeah, many of these kind of trends that are technology driven come from the US. So if there's any change towards more remote working, the one country in the world that will be leading this is the US. Then typically maybe Asia and Europe around the same time are adopting it. I see Asia, at least the developed part of Asia, being a bit more proactive in this than many of the traditional European countries that, you know, where you have works councils and unions that have very, very strong rights and that are opposing this and these kind of things. So typically European countries are a bit more conservative. It's the international companies in Europe. So for example, when I worked at Oracle, yes, I lived in the Netherlands. Yes, we were a Dutch company, but we were part of an American company or international company that was headquartered in the US. And we had an early encouragement in Oracle to allow people to work from home. Actually, in 2002, we abolished a policy called the work from home policy. We abolished it by saying, actually, we have a work from anywhere policy. If you want to work from home, fine. If you want to do it from the beach or your garden, fine, as long as you get the job done, because we only care about the results.
Wonderful. It's been an honor to be here with you. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Benning with a question or two from the audience to wrap it up today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it. I'll just go ahead and hop right into questions because we're pushing up on the hour. A couple questions here. A couple are about career and a couple are about HR specifically. I'll start with an HR question and maybe we'll get to the career question since you just talked about that a little bit. What sort of training should HR do when expanding to new countries? So if you have a company that's expanding to
Yes.
a new country, how would you?
I would, the one training I would really invest in is a training on cultural differences for management, right? Because if you're a manager and you get sent abroad and you've done good work in your home country, you've proven you're a good manager, you get results done, and then you're sent abroad, you think that the approach you've taken to be successful in your own country must be successful in that country as well. That's your working hypothesis, whether you're conscious about it or not. And then you find out that things work very differently, right? I'm just helping a client who has bought a company, a German company who's bought a company in the Netherlands. Now you would think the cultural difference between Germany and the Netherlands are maybe not that great. You know, they're close to each other, and that's true, but there are some massive differences in what motivates Dutch employees, and that is very different from what motivates German employees in terms of the social aspect at work, and having a manager that cares and really honestly asks, how are you doing, how's the family doing? Now, German managers rarely do that, maybe only if they know you for a couple of years. And they're finding at the moment that the integration of the Dutch company into the German company is really not going well. People are leaving, employee turnover is up, not going well. So I would invest in a training on intercultural differences based on the research of Professor Hofstede for managers.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. And let's squeeze one more question in. So I'll pick another career question now because I know that there's students in here. Early on in my career, should I focus on being an HR generalist or specialist in one area, for example, benefits? Any advice on that one, Thomas?
Well, this is a very subjective answer, right? Now, if you know that you love numbers, you want to work in benefits, you want to work in what we call compensation and benefits, so the compensation part as well, you like salary benchmarking and these kind of things, and you want to specialize that, you want to become the world's leading expert in compensation and benefits, then go for it. In more general and very subjectively, from my point of view, it's always better to start out as a generalist, to explore all of the fields that HR has to take care of, from payroll to change management, really everything. Try to spend a good 10 years in generalist roles where you learn this. Maybe, you know, do a quick stint in something a bit more specialist, so you get exposed to it a bit more. But stay generalist, because if you want to become an HR director, if you want to become the chief HR officer at some stage, you cannot only be a specialist, right? Because you will confront it with issues you've never learned about. So I'm a firm believer in be broad in the beginning, and then, you know, if you find out there's something that particularly interests you more than others, then you can still specialize later.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Really, really appreciate you coming in today. You know, you're so insightful and have all these great things. And of course, thank you as a friend. You know, we're very, very old friends, Thomas and I. Really appreciate the timely and insightful presentation on remote work and diversity and inclusion. Very tough topics, but you explained them so well and provided so much insight. Learned a lot from you, and you know, you continue to be this great friend of Marshall, our business school, and to our students. I'd also like to thank Dean Avi for kicking us off today, and our professors, Dr. Yemba and Dr. Knotts, for spearheading this awesome discussion on global HR practices and processes. Finally, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience here today. Please keep an eye out for an email about our next Global Connections, which will be in the fall. We'll host one Global Connections a semester. And with that, Thomas, I don't know if you have any final words that you'd like to say.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I'm sorry my timing was so lousy. I thought we'd have more time for Q&A. I should have shortened my presentation.
No, it was terrific. We absolutely love the knowledge and the insight. Thanks for sharing so much. And if we could go 2 hours, we should go 2 hours next time, because that's always amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Take care and have a great rest of the day.